Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day number 1191, 1191, July the 15th, 2020, Wednesday. Thank you so much for tuning in. Okay, so yesterday on Sean Hannity's radio program, Lindsey Graham told Hannity that he's going to be calling Silly Sally Yates, to testify in front of his committee. So I thought that might be a very appropriate time, since we're going ahead and going back and looking at these transcripts of these interviews that were done back in 2017. I thought now would be a very good time to focus on the testimony of Silly Sally Yates in front of the House Joint Committee headed by Goddlatte-Gowdy. And this particular questioning of Silly Sally occurred on November the 3rd of 2017. Should be noted that, as I said yesterday, some of these transcripts I've seen, some of them have practically no redactions, but others are heavily redacted. And Silly Sally's testimony is one that there are quite a few large areas of redactions on certain questions. So, unfortunately, they are pretty important questions that we'd love to see what's behind those redactions. But at this point, looking at the transcript, we don't know from looking at the transcript. Now, obviously, because it's 3 years down the road, we have a lot more information, and we can pretty well assume what is now behind those redactions. I'm not going to speculate on that. I'm just going to tell you where a redaction occurred, where I would like to have seen it unredacted. But it'll all come out. But I also, the two primary Democrats, of course, doing the interviews, throughout all of these transcripts, it appears that the bug-eyed fool Adam Schiff is the primary questioner on the Democrat side. And sometimes there'll be a couple other staffers. In this particular case, Silly Sally, we had the bug-eyed fool and Eric Fartwell. Yeah, I believe it was Swallowwell. Eric Swallowwell, who farts well as well. He and Schiff were the primary questioners, and there was another guy. On the Republican side, it was primarily Trey Gowdy. There was a point in time in the interview about halfway through where he had to go and vote. And so another gentleman picked up where Gowdy left off and asked questions until Gowdy got back. But that's primarily who were conducting the interviews. Now, I thought Trey Gowdy did something very wise when he began this interview. He kind of set Sally up a little bit. What he did was he asked her at the very beginning to go ahead and lay out her career and her qualifications and all of her accomplishments. And she took full enjoyment of telling the committee about her, high levels of education, her previous high-level appointments and positions in a prestigious law firm, both working for the government and private practice, her law degrees and Ivy League schools and all this kind of stuff. So he gave her the opportunity to bloviate and embellish what a highly intelligent person she is and what a great lawyer she is. And he did that on purpose because he knew that as he went through the interview, that if Silly Sally had to answer some of the questions that he had for her, she was going to look either very guilty or very stupid. If she told the truth, she would look very guilty, and if she danced around it to try to avoid it, she would be like most of these other people that we see in these transcripts, stammering and stuttering and not recalling, not remembering, can't be sure, can't be for sure, whatever. At which point she would look very stupid. So by having her give this bloviating introduction of herself and what a talented lawyer she is and how well educated she is and all these positions she's held, she basically made herself to be this really, highly intelligent, really super lawyer sort of person. So Gowdy kind of set her up for that. That way, as he went through the questioning, she would have a more difficult time sitting there acting like an idiot after she had just introduced herself as this scholar. So I thought Gowdy did a pretty good job of setting her up for what he was going to be dropping on her. Gowdy is a pretty... I'm not a huge Trey Gowdy fan, but just reading through the transcripts and seeing the way he lays out questions and the way he does things, I will say he's a very, very tricky lawyer. You would not want Trey Gowdy as a prosecutor questioning you. Let's put it that way. He's pretty good. So let's just go through some of the questions and answers. Unfortunately, there was some of the more important things are redacted, but we'll go ahead and go through what we could squeeze out of Silly Sally and see what we can learn from that. So when Gowdy right away jumped right into the Carter Page FISA warrant, and he asked her specific questions about the FISA warrant, and her general reaction was that she did remember signing the Carter Page FISA warrant, but she deferred a lot to John Carlin and Mary McCord, the two top people over at DOJ. Obviously, it was Carlin. He leaves in October of 2016. Mary McCord takes over as acting in that position, and as Silly Sally describes it, because Carlin left and McCord was acting in his position after he left, it put more of the responsibility for signing off on FISAs on her. And she describes signing off on multiple FISAs, most of them renewals, almost every day while she was serving in that position. But she said John Carlin, quote, John Carlin would have signed off on that Carter Page FISA, but he left in October 2016. So it fell on me to sign those FISA warrants. So immediately when she's pressed on the Carter Page FISA warrant, after prefacing it by saying, well, it's been 2 years or so, I haven't seen this documentation, I haven't seen the warrant in a long time, I can't remember specifics, but to the best of my recollection, yes, I do remember signing the Carter Page FISA warrant. Yeah, I'm pretty sure she remembers signing the Carter Page FISA warrant. It's kind of a big deal, don't you think? Especially keep in mind, this is November of 2017. This is about 6-7 months into the Mueller investigation, which is hot at that time. It's all anyone's talking about is the Mueller investigation. That's when she's being questioned about all this. And by which time, Trey Gowdy had likely already seen the Carter Page FISA, probably somewhat redacted, but chances are Gowdy had seen more of this information than Sally Yates knew. Now, between her and her two lawyers, and both those lawyers are from that law firm down in Atlanta where she and Christopher Wray came from, and she's back there now, and Wray will end up back there when he retires, or leaves the FBI, which hopefully will be sooner than later. So those two attorneys are from her law firm, basically, and they did the same thing as Rimler does. They started, before the questions even start, they lay out all the things that she's not going to talk about or get into or whatever. So it's the same thing with all these people. They start by putting a wall up, and then Gowdy and his other questioners have to try to tear down that wall or get around it or under it or through it or something to try to get, it's like pulling teeth getting answers out of these people, straight answers. So she tries to deflect and make it, the general way that she handles the question about the Carter Page FISA warrant is that she says she remembers signing the Carter Page FISA warrant, but then goes on to say, yeah, but I was signing lots of warrants. I would have half a dozen come across my desk every day. And, and remember, I had just come into that position. Normally it would have been John Carlin, but then he quit in October. So in comes Mary McCord, but she's acting. So that meant these things were coming to me. And so, yeah, I did sign off on the Carter Page FISA warrant, but it should have been Carlin. So she's automatically in defensive mode as soon as Trey Gowdy starts in on Carter Page FISA warrant, and with good reason. She also said that she had no concerns about signing the Carter Page FISA, but she says she does remember having discussions with the DOJ National Security Division, but she can't remember the specifics. So Trey Gowdy is pressing her on the specifics, the things that were laid out in the Carter Page FISA. And she gives the same type of deal that Rodenstein gave, which is, well, I'm real busy, I'm running the Department of Justice, I got thousands of things going on, I got all these investigations, and I got all these people around me, and it's up to them to kind of check this stuff out, and I'm just kind of signing off on it. That is basically the same position she took, the same thing as Rodenstein. And again, Sally Yates wants to pretty consistently put things off on the DOJ NSD National Security Division, acting as if the DOJ National Security Division is where all the action is. They're the ones making all the decisions, and then they just pass the stuff to her, and she's really just a sort of a rubber stamp. And that's essentially the way it sounds as she describes it. She was asked what does she recall about Christopher Steele. And how he came about getting in contact with the FBI, and that question was totally redacted. It's a very long answer. It's probably 2-3 paragraphs, half a page. When asked about what she recalled about Christopher Steele and how he came in contact with the FBI, it is literally almost completely redacted. There's really not much to learn. Other than the fact that at the very bottom, after all the redactions, you get a little bit of a portion of it at the bottom where she says that, quote, Steele had a good track record with the FBI, was credible, had provided information in the past, and they thought well of him. So what is Silly Sally already starting to do very early on? The same thing all these people do and will continue to do. Put it off on someone else. Oh, Christopher Steele? Well, the FBI told me he was all good. It's not my job to check him out. It's someone else's job to check him out. With all these people, it's always someone else's job to check him out. But we know this was run out of the very top, the tippy top, Sally. She also said that the FBI was trying as best they could to corroborate Steele's reporting. Really? Trying the best they could. They've been dealing with the guy since July 2016. We're now talking about 7 months later, and they're still trying to do the best they can to corroborate it. But we just learned from a judge in London that a couple of lawyers in this judge's office in London knocked down the dossier in 2 days flat. Gowdy asked Silly Sally about having an obligation to give the FISA court Brady material, Giglio material that might be exculpatory. Silly Sally then goes into dummy mode. Yes, that's right, she goes into dummy mode. And she says that she doesn't know specifically what the rule is on FISA, but the practice would generally be to do that. Yeah, to present exculpatory information to the FISA court. But yes, she goes into dummy mode, which is exactly what Gowdy suspected she would do, which is why in the very beginning he set her up to let her bloviate about what a great lawyer she is, how smart she is, how educated she is. This is the very reason he did it, because as he gets further and further in and hits her with the tough questions, she goes into dummy mode. I don't know. I can't remember. As far as I know. Yeah, you're signing off on multiple FISA warrants every day, and you don't know specifically what the rules are. But I thought you were so damn smart. Sally? Apparently not that smart. Signing off on FISAs, but doesn't specifically know what the rule is on FISA. But she's signing off on them anyway. Because Christopher Steele was a lovely guy. A wonderful man. Very credible. Beyond reproach. And he's got a nice smile. Then Gowdy asked, do you recall the evidentiary basis for the FISA application? Yates says, I don't. Probably the most important freaking FISA warrant she's ever signed in her life. Do you recall the evidentiary basis for the FISA application? I don't. Dummy mode. She's in dummy mode. She goes right to dummy mode. Gosh, I don't know. I'm just an idiot. Yes, not according to your opening monologue there. You're pretty damn smart. She says, I recall that it related to him having had interactions with the Russians. Don't recall the specifics. Haven't seen it in a long time. Wasn't aware that the page FISA was first rejected. Because he asked her about that too. Hey, did you know that the FISA was first rejected before it was finally accepted? Until they added in the Steele stuff? No. Didn't know. No one told her. So she doesn't recall the evidentiary basis for the most important FISA application she's ever signed. She only recalls that it had something to do with Steele having interactions with the Russians. Or, I mean, Carter Page having interactions with the Russians. Well, you know, he was a energy consultant working for Merrill Lynch in the oil and energy sector in Europe, living in Russia. If you're involved in being an energy consultant in Europe, being as how Russia is the #1 supplier of gas and natural oil to Europe, you would think it wouldn't be a big deal that obviously he's having interactions. No one went on to ask about the interactions between the Rotten Reverend and the Russians, between Slick Willie and the Russians. No, that's okay. So you can see what she's doing. Well, it's no big deal. I mean, I really can't remember specifically what was going on with that. Yeah, I remember signing the FISA warrant, but it was just one of many FISA warrants I signed. And no, I don't really recall the evidentiary basis for the most important FISA warrant I ever signed. It just had something to do with him talking to Russians, and that would justify a FISA warrant. Talking to a Russian which should certainly get you a FISA warrant. Wasn't aware that the Carter Page FISA warrant was first rejected. Didn't know anything about that. So, again, you can see what she's doing here, putting it off on other people. She is basically going to play the game of, hey, the FBI, when she's finally pressed on this stuff by Durham or whoever, she is going to say, the FBI didn't tell me any of that. The National Security Division didn't tell me that. They kept all this information from me. And that's why I did the things I did. Because I didn't know. I believed them. I trusted the FBI and the NSD. I didn't think they would lie to me. I didn't think that they would keep me out of the loop and then have me sign off on all this stuff. That's the same game that Rodenstein played. They're liars. Then Gowdy asked Silly Sally to explain the difference between collusion, conspiracy, and coordination. That's a good one. I don't have time to read through it all. It's about 2 pages long as she tries to stammer her way through trying to segregate the difference between collusion, conspiracy, and coordination. Needless to say, it's pretty humorous. And Gowdy had some fun with that one. But eventually, Yates says that she doesn't understand really what collusion is in a legal sense. Right. Because you did this whole thing on Russia collusion when, in fact, even Silly Sally had to admit right there that collusion really isn't something that, you know, in the legal business, we don't deal with collusion. But I don't even know what the hell collusion is in a legal sense. That's what she said. But we got a Russia collusion investigation, didn't we? Along with the Flynn collusion case, which she primarily worked on. We'll get to that. Then Gowdy asked, do you recall seeing evidence, regardless of the source and regardless of how it was vetted, any evidence of collusion, conspiracy, coordination between Donald Trump himself and Russia, whether it was state actors or anyone else, to interfere with or influence the 2016 election? At which point, Yates' attorney keeps her from answering the question, and he says she has to be very careful about answering these types of questions. At which point, Gowdy says, yeah, I would not expect her to be anything other than careful. She didn't want to answer that question. And then she goes on to explain that John Carlin and Mary McCord, again blaming it on other people, were the heads at the NSD that would have known more. I didn't know anything. Ask Carlin and Mary McCord. They know it all. They didn't tell me anything. They just told me a little bit. I was in the early stages of my tenure at that time, so I wasn't as informed as those in the NSD would have been. And while I was at the DOJ at that time, I don't believe anybody had reached a conclusion as to whether or not there was a nefarious alliance with the Russians and Trump. We were in the fact-gathering stage. If you're asking me if I had reached that conclusion, the answer is no. No. However, there was a conclusion by the intel community that the Russian government at the highest levels, in fact Putin himself, had directed the intrusion of the DNC servers. I had not seen any evidence at that time that Trump had been involved in that. Then Gowdy has to go vote. And so someone else picks up the questioning. So the questioner says, who did you have the most contact with when you were deputy AG over at the FBI? She said, well, that would be Andy McCabe or Jim Comey. Next question. Can you tell me when you, as deputy AG, first became aware of this investigation? And that would have been the investigation into Russia hacking the 2016 election. That's what they're referring to. And Yates' question, again, can you tell me when you, as deputy AG, first became aware of this investigation? Silly Sally says, oh, gosh, no. I couldn't even begin to put a date on that. Have no idea when I first became aware of the investigation into the Russian hacking. Now, farther on into this questioning, Gowdy eventually comes back and he digs back into this, and she's eventually kind of pressed on it, and she says it would have been after the hack had become public, but it could have been weeks later, months later. She just can't remember. She also was asked, again, they get back into the FISA warrants, and she said something that's pretty interesting, I think. She said that whenever she signed off on FISAs, that she always had staff members, her staff members were always there in the room when she was, because they would come in and give her the FISA warrants. Okay, here's half a dozen you got to sign today. 4 renewals, 2 are new ones, and it's all good. Okay, good. Stamp, 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 stamp. There you go. That's kind of how she describes the process works, unless one of her staffers had reviewed it and found there might be a problem, in which case they would point that out to her. And in the case of Carter Page, they did. When Sally got to the Carter Page FISA warrant, she was told by her staff to look closely at the Page FISA because of the subject matter. Sally says she didn't know that it was Christopher Steele's reports that made up most of the Carter Page FISA. She said that it was just explained to her that it was just information that was given to the FBI. So now she's painting a picture that she's given this information in the application to get the Carter Page FISA warrant, but she's not really being told that the source is Christopher Steele. Or that the dossier, she said she never even heard of the word dossier until after the release of the dossier. Prior to that, it was just the Crown information or the Steele information. But she's suggesting that when she was given the Carter Page FISA, that she wasn't really told that it was specific to things coming from Christopher Steele, other than the fact that it was just information given to the FBI and that there may have been some Christopher Steele information in there, but nothing as was pertained specifically to a dossier or memos or anything like that. Of course, now we know it was all Christopher Steele's bullshit, and she knows it too. So why hasn't Silly Sally come out and gone public about how angry she is that she was deceived by her very own DOJ NSD, by the FBI, by Comey, by all the rest? None of these people seem to have any problem with the fact that they were all duped, if they were really duped. I would. If I was sitting at a hearing, I'd say, man, and you don't know how pissed off I am. Now that we know all this, and we know it was all a fraud, boy, am I pissed that all those people deceived me. Nah, not a word of that. She loves those people. Considers them professionals. The best of the best. Just like her. She also says, regarding the information given to the FBI about the Carter Page FISA warrant, and she says, quote, and I seem to recall that there was other information as well. Not according to Inspector General Huckleberry Horowitz. According to Huckleberry Horowitz, no, it was pretty much the Steele dossier. So that other information, maybe Lindsey Graham can ask her what that other information was, because Horowitz couldn't find it. And now that everybody's read the damn FISA application, it ain't there. It's all Christopher Steele's bullshit. Christopher Steele's bullshit. Do you think she knew about it? We'll find out. She's starting to look like a dummy. When did you first become aware that General Flynn had been in contact with the Russian ambassador? She says, I learned that in early January of this year, 2017, from both the FBI and the NSD. Next question. Do you recall the setting? That is totally redacted. That entire, there's multiple, just literally a full page, totally read it out. It's not black, it's red. Read it out on that question there. Do you recall the setting? Now, once you get past all the red part, redacted, you get to the bottom, and it picks up where she says, early on before the false statements, this is what she's saying. She's talking about Flynn. Early on before the false statements and all started, she's talking about Flynn making false statements. So this was early on when we first learned about the information, but being certainly inconsistent with what the practice had been, one president, one administration at a time, and there were concerns about the Logan Act. There were dual concerns at that time. The concern was that he, Flynn, was having conversations with the Russians, attempting to influence their conduct during this administration, and that would be unusual and troubling. Now, of course, we know from the Flynn-Kislyak phone call being released, there was absolutely nothing troubling or unusual about it at all. Flynn basically told the Russians to not overreact to it. That's all he said. Well, I certainly hope you don't overreact. What else could he say? We're going to get to the bottom of that in just a minute. Next question. Were you concerned that there was potential criminal issues in addition to the Logan Act? All redacted. Were you concerned that there was potential criminal issues in addition to the Logan Act regarding Michael Flynn? All redacted. But she did say, once you get past all the redactions, that there were early discussions of Flynn, which included the National Security Division and the FBI, and a few people from her office discussing all this. She also said that the Flynn transcripts that she was given did not need to be unmasked because the transcripts were already provided to her with Flynn's name in them. Yates says that she never requested unmasking of Flynn. Somebody else did, but she does not know who. Yates says she doesn't know what triggered the FBI to start a counterintelligence operation or investigation against Flynn. She said it had something to do with Russia. Yates met 2 times with White House counsel Don McGahn. The first meeting with McGahn, he asked Yates if there was a criminal investigation into Flynn, and Yates refused to answer. But she did tell McGahn that Flynn had possibly committed a crime. Now here is where Silly Sally has to be very careful, because regardless of what happens with Durham's investigation, we now know that it was Silly Sally and McCord who went to White House counsel McGahn's office on 2 occasions and pressed him really, really hard and pressured him into telling the White House, hey, you got to go fire Flynn because he's likely committed criminal offenses. It was Silly Sally who applied the pressure on McGahn to force the White House to fire Flynn. And now we know it was all based on bullshit. Bullshit. Which means that Michael Flynn could likely have a pretty strong civil suit against Silly Sally, one that could result in her paying him a lot of money. That's why she wants to be very careful. She's worried about the civil liability at this point, and she's certainly liable for some civil liability because she is the one. If you want to point to one person that forced the firing of Michael Flynn, it was Silly Sally. And now we know that it was all a setup, a frame-up. And either A, she knew about it and she's lying, or B, she's playing the dummy. Either way, whether she was the idiot or whether she knew what was going on and she's lying, doesn't matter to the jury awarding damages in a civil suit. All that matters is she did it. if you destroy your neighbor's property and he takes you to civil court, it doesn't matter if you intended to do it or not. You destroyed the damn property. Period. That's how civil court works. You don't need intent, just damage, just liability. The issues with Flynn were, according to Silly Sally, sanctions and the UN Security Council. So we now know that Flynn did nothing wrong in regards to sanctions and didn't tell the Russians what to do on sanctions either way, over than he said basically not to overreact. He gave them no instructions whatsoever. There was nothing wrong. And remember, it was Kislyak who brought up the sanctions. And Michael Flynn avoided it. He got the best, short, quick answer to get out of it as he could. And he stayed totally legal. Did nothing wrong. I said, well, the only thing I got to say is, just, don't overreact. Don't overreact. He did nothing wrong, and we know that. And the other issue, which is probably the real prickly issue, and the one that Obama was really hot under the collar over, was the issue regarding the vote in the UN Security Council on the settlements in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, which he did nothing wrong there either. The January 5th meeting was about Russian activities in the 2016 election, according to Silly Sally. And she says that Comey, Clapper, and Brennan were there. Comey, Clapper, and Brennan. She said that is when she first heard about the Flynn-Kislyak call. She said she does not know who informed President Obama about the Flynn-Kislyak call. It's been attributed at this point to her that she's the one who somehow said it was Clapper. But when Gowdy asked her about that, she said, no, I didn't say that, and I don't know that. I don't know who told Obama. I know when I was in the January 5th meeting, that's what was first brought up to me about Flynn Kislyak. And then she said, as soon as I walked out of the meeting and went to my office, within a very short period of time, Mary McCord came over and gave me a DOJ briefing about the Flynn Kislyak situation. So it was on January 5th, 2017, when Silly Sally learned it in that January 5th meeting, and then right after that she got an even more in-depth, that's when she got transcripts and all that kind of stuff from the DOJ. Mary McCord. Mary McCord was a busy little woman behind the scenes. She was also like a player in this deal that you hear her name come up all the time. She was definitely a player in the coup, working back and forth between the FBI and the DOJ, working behind, and again, we can only speculate on what the role is of Sally Yates, because as Rodenstein did, is just what Yates is doing, try to pin it on someone else. Oh, it was Mary McCord and Carlin. Then Carlin leaves and it's McCord and NSD and the FBI. Nobody's responsible. Everybody else did it. Nobody's responsible for any of it. Everybody else did something. But the person they're questioning never actually did anything. This is what they're all going to do. They're all going to try to point the finger at someone else. That's why Durham has got to get to the bottom of this and find out who's lying. I think Silly Sally's lying. I don't think she's that stupid, which is why Gowdy, in the very beginning, allowed her to bloviate about her credentials. For the very reason that as she went through the testimony, she has to do, her only choice to get through this thing without incriminating herself is to look like a dummy. And Gowdy set her right up, and she had no choice. She fell right in line. She played the dummy, just like Rodenstein. She said she didn't know that the FBI was paying Steele when she signed the FISA. She didn't know that the FBI was paying Steele when she signed the FISA. Do you believe that? If so, she's stupid. She knew he was an informant. That would have been the first question I would have asked. He's an informant working for the FBI. Is he a paid informant or an unpaid informant? She said she did know that Steele had been paid by a Republican and the Hillary campaign. And she said the fact that Steele was working for Hillary could be a factor, but that they had worked to corroborate the information, and not all the information was directly connected to the Steele information. They had worked to corroborate the information. No, they never did, because it couldn't be corroborated, because it was bullshit, Sally. And not all the info was directly connected to Steele. No, actually it was. Horowitz told us that. Silly Sally, lawyer up. I certainly hope that Durham sends you away for some time to think about what you did. And if not, I do hope that you have to pay Mr. Page a large sum of money. Thank you for tuning in. I'll be back tomorrow with more TowerGate.